Welcome to our channel. Today, we bring you the epic story of World War II, a war that changed the world forever. Stay with us as we uncover the rise, the battles, and the victory that shaped history. And before we begin, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon for more amazing stories from history. The Second World War did not begin overnight. It was born from the ashes of the First. When the Treaty of Versailles ended World War I, it left Germany humiliated, stripped of land, and burdened with crushing reparations. A proud nation was reduced to despair. Amidst this chaos, a charismatic yet dangerous figure rose, Adolf Hitler. Promising jobs, pride, and vengeance, he rallied a broken people under the Nazi banner. Across the world, the 1930s were a time of turmoil. The Great Depression crippled economies, and in the shadows of hardship, extremist ideologies thrived. Benito Mussolini in Italy preached fascism, while Emperor Hirohito's Japan sought to dominate Asia. Democracies struggled to respond, as many leaders hoped for peace, still haunted by the memories of the Great War. Step by step, Hitler tested the world's patience. He rebuilt Germany's army in defiance of the treaty, sent troops into the Rhineland, and annexed Austria in the Anschluss of 1938. Europe watched nervously, yet appeasement prevailed. At the Munich Conference, Britain and France gave Hitler the Sudetenland in exchange for his promise of peace. But peace was never his intention. Meanwhile, in Asia, Japan had already invaded Manchuria in 1931 and later China in 1937, committing atrocities such as the Nanjing Massacre. The world condemned these acts, but no one intervened. Finally, in September 1939, Hitler's true ambition was revealed. Backed by a secret pact with Stalin's Soviet Union, Germany invaded Poland. Tanks rolled across the plains, and the skies thundered with bombers. Britain and France could no longer stand aside. 2 days later, they declared war on Germany. The world was once again at war, this time on a scale even greater than before. The invasion of Poland was only the beginning. The world soon witnessed a new kind of warfare, blitzkrieg, or lightning war. German tanks, artillery, and aircraft struck with terrifying speed and precision, overwhelming enemies before they could react. Poland fell within weeks, carved apart by Germany in the west and the Soviet Union in the east. The winter of 1939 to 1940, known as the Phony War, saw little action on the Western Front. But in the spring, Hitler struck again. Denmark and Norway were conquered in mere days, giving Germany control of vital sea routes. Then, in May 1940, the Wehrmacht turned west. The Netherlands and Belgium crumbled under the Blitzkrieg, and France, once the strongest power in Europe, collapsed in just 6 weeks. The world was stunned. At Dunkirk, hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers were trapped on the beaches, surrounded by German forces. In a desperate gamble, Britain launched a massive evacuation, using not only warships but also fishing boats and civilian vessels. Against all odds, over 300,000 men were rescued. It was not victory, but it was survival. With France defeated, Hitler turned his gaze across the Channel. Britain now stood alone. The summer of 1940 brought the Battle of Britain, the first major campaign fought entirely in the air. The German Luftwaffe unleashed relentless bombing raids on cities and airfields, hoping to break British resistance. But the Royal Air Force, aided by radar and unyielding courage, fought back fiercely. London burned under the Blitz, but Britain did not fall. Prime Minister Winston Churchill rallied his people with words that would echo through history. "We shall never surrender." Though Hitler dominated the continent, Britain's defiance kept hope alive. The war was far from over. It was only spreading wider. By 1941, the war had consumed Europe, but soon it would engulf the entire world. Hitler, confident after his victories, made a fateful decision: to break his pact with Stalin. In June 1941, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in history. Millions of German soldiers surged into the Soviet Union, expecting a quick victory. Cities like Kiev and Smolensk fell, but the vastness of Russia and the resilience of its people turned the campaign into a brutal struggle. As winter set in, German troops found themselves ill-prepared, freezing and starving before the gates of Moscow. The myth of the invincible Wehrmacht began to crack. Meanwhile, far across the Pacific, another storm was brewing. On December 7, 1941, Japanese planes roared over Pearl Harbor, raining fire on the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Battleships burned, thousands were killed, and America, once reluctant to join the war, was thrust into the conflict overnight. President Roosevelt declared it a date which will live in infamy. Within days, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States, officially making it a truly global war. The fighting spread across continents. In North Africa, German General Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, clashed with British forces in a deadly contest of strategy and endurance. In the Pacific, Japan swept through the Philippines, Malaya, and Singapore, establishing a vast empire with astonishing speed. Allied forces reeled from defeat after defeat, as prisoners of war endured unimaginable suffering. For a time, the Axis powers seemed unstoppable. But beneath the shadows of conquest, seeds of resistance and resilience grew. The Soviet Union refused to collapse, Britain still stood firm, and now the industrial might of the United States had entered the fray. The flames of war had spread across the globe, and the tide was beginning to turn. The year 1942 marked a turning point. For the first time since the war began, the Allies began to push back against the Axis war machine. The momentum of conquest was slowing, and the tide of history was shifting. In the Pacific, the Japanese advance seemed unstoppable until the Battle of Midway in June 1942. Here, U.S. Admiral Chester Nimitz and his fleet struck back with brilliant precision. 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, the pride of their navy, were sunk in a single battle. The balance of power in the Pacific began to tilt. From that moment, the Allies launched their island-hopping campaign, retaking territory step by step, fighting through jungles, beaches, and seas soaked with blood. In North Africa, the desert became a battlefield of tanks and strategy. German General Rommel fought fiercely, but at El Alamein in late 1942, British forces under General Bernard Montgomery delivered a decisive blow. Churchill declared, "Before Alamein we never had a victory. After Alamein, we never had a defeat." But the most brutal struggle unfolded on the Eastern Front. At Stalingrad, a city on the Volga River, the Soviet Union made its stand. For months, the battle raged street by street, building by building. Soldiers fought in the ruins, civilians endured starvation, and the frozen winter became an enemy to both sides. By February 1943, the once feared German Sixth Army was trapped and forced to surrender. It was Hitler's first major defeat and a turning point that shook the Axis to its core. By the end of 1943, the Allies were no longer merely surviving, they were advancing. The dream of Axis domination had begun to crumble, and the hope of liberation burned brighter with each passing day. By 1944, the Allies were ready to strike at the very heart of Nazi-occupied Europe. The stage was set for the largest seaborne invasion in history, D-Day. On the morning of June 6, 1944, the beaches of Normandy erupted with fire and steel as waves of Allied troops stormed ashore. Under relentless gunfire, thousands fell, but the courage of soldiers from America, Britain, Canada, and other nations carved a path into Fortress Europe. Within weeks, France began to rise again, and by August, Paris was liberated. In the east, the Soviet Red Army pressed forward with overwhelming force, pushing German troops back through Ukraine, Poland, and the Balkans. Each mile reclaimed was soaked in blood, but with every advance, the Reich crumbled further. Meanwhile, in Italy, Mussolini's fascist regime had collapsed, though fighting dragged on against German forces in the rugged mountains. Resistance movements across Europe, French partisans, Polish fighters, and countless others, struck at occupiers, proving that the will for freedom was unbreakable. Across the seas, the war in the Pacific grew fiercer. The U.S. captured islands like Saipan, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, but at unimaginable cost. Japanese soldiers fought to the last man, and the use of kamikaze pilots revealed Japan's desperate determination. The closer the Allies drew to the Japanese homeland, the more brutal the fighting became. By late 1944, Hitler's regime was cornered, but he made one final gamble, the Battle of the Bulge in December. German forces surged into Belgium, catching the Allies off guard. Yet, after weeks of bitter winter fighting, the offensive failed. The last hope of the Reich was extinguished. The road to liberation was nearly complete. The Axis powers were collapsing, and final victory was within reach. By the dawn of 1945, the Axis powers were collapsing. The Allies closed in on Germany from both east and west. Cities lay in ruins, the skies thundered with Allied bombers, and Nazi forces were retreating on every front. In April, Soviet troops reached Berlin, fighting street by street through a shattered capital. Deep inside his bunker, Adolf Hitler faced the inevitable. On April 30th, he took his own life, unwilling to witness Germany's defeat. Days later, the Nazi regime surrendered unconditionally. On May 8, 1945, the world celebrated victory in Europe Day V-Day. But in the Pacific, the war still raged. The battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa had shown the terrible cost of invading Japanese territory. Facing the prospect of millions more deaths, the United States made a fateful decision. In August 1945, atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The devastation was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Entire cities reduced to ashes in seconds. On August 15, 1945, Japan announced its surrender. The most destructive war in human history was finally over. Yet peace came at an unimaginable cost. More than 70 million people, soldiers and civilians, had perished. The Holocaust had revealed humanity's darkest depths, with millions of Jews and other victims murdered in Nazi death camps. Entire nations were left in ruins, their people scarred by loss and suffering. But from the ashes, a new world began to take shape. The United Nations was founded, an international hope for peace and cooperation. At the same time, tensions between the Soviet Union and the Western Allies ignited the Cold War, setting the stage for decades of rivalry. World War II had ended, but its echoes would shape the destiny of the modern world.